And good morning. Here we are. What time is it? Oh, it's afternoon. Good afternoon. It's 12:34 here on Eastern Standard Time, and today's probably the coldest day. I was gonna go run around and and till the land, but it's like 19 degrees outside. So I instead made myself meal and made myself a really nice Spanish omelet and started a very nice pasta stew. All of these things are leftovers from days past, and that's how I, eat pretty well for about $24 a week. Which I don't throw anything away. I just keep making it over and over again till it boils. And as long as it smells okay and doesn't have any mold growing on it, then it's edible, right? It's sustainable. It's sustenance. And that's how we have to look at our society. If it doesn't smell real bad and there isn't mold growing on it, then it has a potential to be sustainable, especially if we take a hand at bringing it forth. But we just sit back and expect, get comfy with everything around us. Even if it changes, oh, look at that, that's terrible. Oh, those people are terrible. Oh, that's terrible. Well, that's how people can't, like, my parents took me when I got, almost killed in the seminary, and I just got out basically my life, and then I was gonna go to another prep school, even more seemingly stringent, almost jail-like place, but it was for the richest people in the world, so it was actually quite comfortable. That's where I kind of got to like, well, this is pretty all right. I don't mind this, because even though every minute of our day was kind of controlled, these guys were rich. They knew how to navigate it, right? So I learned from those guys how to navigate, the rich. And they were all children of the powers that shouldn't be, my graduating class was 30-something guys, and their families probably controlled, 80% of the wealth in the world. Hugh Hinman was my best friend there, or my truly best friend. I mean, the guy who we really were like brothers, right? I had good friends amongst everyone in that school, right? Because the beauty of that school was there was no, there wasn't no class. Everyone was at the top of the heap. So what was truly interesting is that no one picked on each other, because everyone had done something so terrible that they could easily be picked on, but no one picked on anybody. So there were some guys there who were really obnoxious. They couldn't help themselves. They just said the most obnoxious things and did the most, and those guys, and they were small, and you could easily have just chewed them up, but nobody did. And that was one of the very interesting things. And I had a great professor there whose father had been a scholar, and he had been teaching at Harvard. And when the Red Scare came, these thought police came in, and you're fired. Anybody, they didn't even have to be in the Communist Party. You're fired. And he was a tenured professor, and he was published. And he was just about to publish his next big book where he was probably going to make some money. And the publisher said, sorry, can't do that. And you're fired. He couldn't even get a job in high school teaching. And he was teaching at Harvard, right? He ended up being a janitor. And he got fired from that when his boss, oh, I heard you're a commie, you're fired. And he went home and put his service. This guy had a Silver Star and 4 Purple Hearts from fighting in World War II. and he ate his service revolver. And my teacher came home. He was coming home from high school and or middle school, and he found his father's head blown all over the living room, and his mother had committed suicide when she came in. So he was the only child. So he ended up going to live with his aunt, who was big thing of the Catholic Church, and he got to go to Catholic schools. Did really went to Brown. He didn't go to any. He hated the church, right? But he put his head down, got a good education, and read and wrote, and that was the beauty of the school, because virtually everyone in that school who was the teachers, more than half were guys who came from Wesleyan and Brown and schools like that, who weren't really rich but were smart enough to go to a good college, and they weren't rich enough to buy their way out of the Vietnam War, so they could get a deferment for teaching in high school. If you were white and could teach in high school, especially a wealthy prep school, you could get out of the Vietnam War. So we had all of these guys who were, basically draft dodgers. And then they got there and they realized, they were getting paid zip, like, $300 a semester. But they got the room and board. They didn't have a family, they didn't have kids. So they just kind of, and then they realized that they were teaching the wealthiest people in the world. And if they could change those kids' minds, maybe, just maybe, they might change the world, right? So they did that. And so we also had, Mr. B, Professor B, he wasn't as young as those guys. He was in his 30s, right? The other guys were in their mid-20s, right? And so the school, the Winchendon School for Boys in Winchendon, Massachusetts, which is where I graduated, went to school too, was way out in the middle of the northern parts of Massachusetts, right on the border of New Hampshire. We looked right at the presidentials. Mount Washington was right freaking there. And so we had all these guys who were in their mid-20s who are professors. And so the Winchendon School, Mr. Marr, Moron Marr, and his he's just like the Orange Pinhead. He looked just like him, had to comb over. He was a little thinner. But his two boys were just like, there was Moron Marr Jr. and Larry, and Larry was just, and he had a wife who was really hot, right? And she was boinking every boy in that school, But she had, she was a porno star, she looked like one. I don't know if she made any movies, but, she was blonde and she had this way about her. And she couldn't help herself. And, she was like, the carrot pinhead who could go down Fifth Avenue and shoot anybody and not get arrested, right? And so I saw what was coming in 1964, 5, and 6, right? There I was going, And I went to school with Eddie Merrill and Ricky Lynch. And they were planning the economic debacle of the country. So, in high school, we read Howard. We read stuff that most people, even in college, didn't read. Hanging out with the Marino guys, I learned Hebrew and Latin, and that. And then I got tuned up, and when I went to school to be a priest, I didn't last long enough. But even in that school, I had 3 or 4 priests who really said, you could change the Catholic Church. And the head guy of that school felt the same way. That's why he let me in, because he said, no, this kid, he's no. My parents go, oh, no, he wants to be a priest. And he was going, no. And my, cardinal godfather said, he's going here. So that guy said, okay. But he would take me off to the side and talk to me like he talked to nobody else. And that school had about 600 kids in it. Anyway, so maybe more. Our freshman class was 300 and something, larger than the whole school. So that was, I went to school at Canterbury in New Milford, Connecticut, right? That's what that school was. And they had slaves, you know. They actually had slaves. They had brown people and white people, Irish, who were indentured, meaning, generation after generation. They came there, they were starving. The school said, okay, here, you can work here. You can work in the kitchen. You can work on the farm. You can fix things. And we'll just charge you this much for the food and this much for, your rent. And we'll, take it out of your paycheck. Well, they never made enough money to go any further than there, and a generation. So as I became, the enemy of the state, by the hands of the, Jesuit priest who, had polio, his legs were useless, so he gimped around on crutches, and he was, he was evil. He would really do the worst. There was a thing called fagging where freshmen had to do. We were slaves to the juniors and seniors, and the only thing they would say, well, when you get to be a junior senior, you can treat the freshmen and sophomores the same way we're treating you. Right? That was the only kind of relief we got. And in our, this was 1962. We said no to that. We said, we were right there with Malcolm and Martin, right? And that class, that 1968 class was, so I guess it was 1964, but that class was totally different from the rest of the school. I mean, none of us really went to that. Most of them just tried to put their heads down. There was one guy, Austin Hearst, he was the grandson of the Hearst publisher. He was Patty Hearst's brother. He was a schmuck, right? I mean, he had a good side. He and I actually kind of got along, but he said, I like you, Al. I like the way you talk. I like the way you think. I like to, you're the only smart kid here that I can have an interesting conversation with. But I have to treat you like a troll when, I have to be the troll of you when the rest of the guys are around, when it's just you and me off to the side, and I'm smoking a cigarette, because I wasn't rich, And he wasn't even, he was Catholic, but not really. He was a not really type of Catholic, which most Catholics are. Like, what's his name said? Mahatma Gandhi said, when someone said, well, what do you think of Christianity? And Bubba said, well, I really like Jesus. His teachings are really great. I just wish some of his followers would follow his teaching. And so I lived in North Africa in the 70s. Your connection is unstable. Please wait while we try and reconnecting. It's the most beautiful day. No one's using anything in the house. So my signal should be, 5 by 5, someone's just interrupting. It's because, they want to. And there's only 2 of you there and no one's chatting. So, and I started this off hi, good morning, good evening. How you doing? This is your Sensei Al Bob coming to you on your Dreamy Dreamland channel. And I am your griot. I tell you stories. And, the last 14 minutes I've been telling you a story, And what I'm leading up to is like, things seem really strange right now, right? We have Carrot Pinhead as president and the 3 Stooges as his, Secretary of State, his Attorney General and his, you could mush the rest of the third 3 Stooges into who's that rich cat who's and there are a lot of rich, he came to drain the swamp, and the swamp is made up of rich cats, and his whole friggin' cabinet is full of rich cats. His Treasury Secretary, Education Secretary, Commerce Secretary, who looks like one big Twinkie. Um, these guys, they are the swamp. They are the gook at the bottom of the swamp, right? But the thing about the carrot pinhead is that he can't help himself but expose everything for what it is. I mean, of any of the presidents we've ever had, this guy, he lies like a rug, but by lying, he's telling the truth because our government has always been based on lies. War on poverty, make people, even poorer. They were making war on the poor. That was the war on poverty. Urban development, that was like to go in and bulldoze people's homes. You go into any city and you'll see the interstate bypass going right through the city, and they do it right through the poor people's, and they bulldoze. The best example of this was, and the person who did this was Robert Moses, the Highway King. Go read books about that guy. And so the Brooklyn Queens Expressway, he dug a trench right through, the Bronx, Brooklyn, Queens, Harlem, and then the East Side. Just blew it away, right? And it's like, and so people couldn't get to the other side of their neighborhood. The trench was there. They had where the avenues were. Yeah, they had bridges, but not, all the other streets just kind of dead-ended on this trench, and the car exhausts, all the lead in that gas, all the people who lived within 20 blocks of that trench, their kids, dropped 40 IQ points, and they knew all of this. Ford and the Nazis had done experiments on the effects of gasoline on people, right? So everything that environmentally has ever been done to this country has been known before, right? And when you look at what is the motif of capitalism, it's supposed to be this competition between companies so we get the best product, blah, blah, blah. No. You talk about welfare, the biggest welfare is a corporate state. That's what an oligarchy is. And a plutocratic fascist oligarchy is what we have. And we've had it since George Washington, because that guy was one of the richest people in the country. He owned slaves. And, he got involved in the French and Indian Wars. And what was that? It was the French against the English. But what it really was, it was a, the French and English kind of had this little hidden shake back in Europe, where they're going to have these wars. Instead of having them in Europe, like the 100 Years' War, we'll have them in America. And we'll use them to, genocide these pesky Indians who keep telling us we should live up to our standards. And then, we make deals with them and then we kill them, So this has been going on since, right? So it's just like that frog in the bucket, and you put on the heat, and first the frog goes, oh, this is nice warm. Oh, yeah. And then the bubbles come up and, oh, yeah, it's like a jacuzzi. Oh, yeah. And then he's soup, and people are eating his legs, So that's where we are. And that's, people go on about how did Germany, Germany was the most educated, well-placed. And that was what World War I was about. It was an economic war. It wasn't that they killed some duke in Sarajevo. No, it was Germany was leading. First, England brought industrialization to the world in the 1790s. And then, by the, early 20th century, Germany was kicking butt, and you were marked by how big your empire was how kick-ass your navy was. And Germany, who, had a tenth of the industrial might, was building a navy that was going to obliterate the English navy. And that's how England became the head of the empire, by, sinking the Spanish Armada. The Spanish had all of, the west coast of America, Mexico, Central America, South America, all the gold. And they were, at the top of the heap, but they did not. All they did was buy more guns and kill more people. Whereas the English were, more about commerce, to have an empire through commerce, right? And the United States is this kind of hybrid mutant bastard that we are kind of both. We're kind of like the Spanish, having this killing machine, and yet on the same corner we are the large, big commerce guys, banking, but in reality, you have to look at how it's structured. We have the Vatican, which is an entity unto itself. It's in Rome, it's in Italy, but it doesn't have to, go by any laws of the people. And they own everyone's soul. That's the religious mecca, right? In the business sense, whereas all the stuff in the Mideast and in Africa and Asia, those spiritual sites are actually spiritual sites. They're not religious commerce, which is what the Vatican City is. Then you have the city of London, which is the center of all commerce. That's where, through the Rothschild banks, all the central banks, the IMF, the World Bank, all that stuff goes through that. So they own the money, the bling, right? Then, and that's why they still have, South Africa, they had apartheid and all of that, and then it became too expensive to do that. So they said, oh, good, we'll let this guy Mandela out of prison, let him be president, let him look really cool, but we'll still own everything. And then we'll find some really corruptible Black people that, we can keep making them president. They've had the same party since apartheid fell. So apartheid never left, right? And that's all controlled by England. You go look at the SAS and see, we've only had police forces that are municipal for the last 100 years. Up until then, all the armies, all of the police forces were owned, right? We're basically mercs. And we let the common folk be cops, but they were still owned, right? They had the blue shield, the blue line. And what we are watching right now, Bill Clinton kind of started it by militarizing, the police forces. And, the Civil War, Lincoln did a lot of bad things. And one of them was, he put the army in as like when the Irish Rebellion occurred in New York City, because, see, the Civil War was not about, slavery. It was about a means of production, whether we were going to be industrial or agricultural, right? Agrarian society. And the South was actually making more money selling cotton than, the North was selling pots and pans. So they had to break that economic thing. And the Civil War was really started by England and France, who were pissed off that they didn't have their flags flying, even though they had commerce and power in the United States. They, didn't, in essence, own it. They did, but they didn't, right? So they wanted to go back in there and kick butt, and put their flags back up and basically start off where they left off with the revolution. And the revolution was actually an English lord's idea, because King George was, basically nuts. And the guys, his, people in his government, they had all kinds of factions. And one of them was, it's costing us an arm and a leg to keep, taking care of North America. And we're not getting much out of it. So why don't we start a war, let it have a revolution, and we'll walk away, right? And then we come back a few years later, and when the guys are old and doddering, and burn their capital to the ground and give them, okay, bitches, you do what we say from this point on or else, right? And that's where we got the special relationship, the Anglo-American special relationship. We've been the queen or king's bitches. We fought every war. Why were we in China? Did you ever read the book or see the movie with Steve McQueen, The Pearl? Why was our Navy and Marines fighting Chinese, over opium? And that's how, we kind of, go watch the movie, The French Connection, So all this stuff is right in our face, right? but we are distracted by Burger King commercials, and we are really still in the we are in the Fourth Reich, because after the fall of after World War II and Germany was bombed into the Stone Age, um, we brought over 70,000, not 1,300, 70,000 Nazis through this thing called Operation Paperclip. And it was kind of facilitated through the Pope and the Vatican through these things called the rat lines, where they just got all these high-end Nazis, SS and you name it, not the common German, out of Germany, right? And left the poor German people, as they always do, suffer, right? After World War I. Ooh, go watch the movie Cabaret, and you will understand how they freaking, people go, how did the German people go for Adolf Hitler? Well, they were, we only had the Depression from, 29 to 39, 10 years or so. They had it for almost 30 years, from, 1918 till, the beginning of World War II, beginning of Adolf in 33. And he did some simple things. He said, forget it to the Versailles Treaty. We're not giving you any more representation, and we're kicking the central banks out of Germany, and we're floating our own currency ourselves. Thank you very much. And we're going to give it value, and we're going to give everybody a job. So they cleaned up all the garbage, built roads, and started to bring back their industry so they could build a military might. Now the Versailles Treaty said, oh, you can't have battleships any bigger than this, and you can't have this, and you can't have that, and you can't have propelled airplanes. So why do you think they got jet airplanes before anybody else? Because they were forced to by us, right? And that technology was kind of understood in the actually the Greeks did it. I forgot which Greek philosopher did it, but he had this thing where he had this little ball and little pipes coming out of it, and he built a fire and he put water in the ball, and he built fire, and it boiled, and it spun really fast, and these two jets going in different and spinning the ball. So the jet engine was like invented by the Greeks in like 600 BC. This technology, all of the technologies that we have to realize that there have been societies, cultures, millions of years on this planet before us. We've been here. This planet has been around a few billion years. So over that time, if we could go from a lush green paradise with, big, what are those things called? Pterodactyls and, T-Rexes and those guys. We go from that world, asteroid hits it, obliterates the place, right? Creates a, boom, 100 trillion, billion, trillion tons of dirt was put up in the atmosphere. We basically had what is known as a nuclear winter, and we lasted for 1,000 years. That's why there was, 2 miles of ice on top of the Earth, right? And other times, the myth of the flood, well, they had plenty of floods. If you've ever climbed any mountains, you'll find shells on top of the mountain. How did that happen? Well, when you have a 1,000-foot wave, and how does that happen? Well, when you have a solar minimum and the solar energy is less and less, and that's what makes the the fields around our planet. And when they get less and less and less, our poles no longer are kept in their place, and so we have some of the lowest electrogravitic currents running around our planet than ever recorded. So people are worrying about the virus. People are worrying about the economic collapse. People are worrying about the carrot pinhead. People are worrying about somebody blowing something up, either North Korea or somebody. It's all these worries, which are just distractions from the things that could really and a good day because you know the Spanish flu of 1917, good example, right? Well, that was a really nasty pandemic, and it ran its course around the world, and it wiped out, somewhere between a third and a fifth of the world's population in 3 years. Well, didn't seem to even, people don't even know about it. My mom, when she was a little girl, they went to visit her aunt out in the country for Thanksgiving, got hit by a big snowstorm and got snowed in there until mid-January. So they came back to Watertown, their town, and everyone in her school everyone who was in that town who was a kid or an old person was dead. So that's why my mom had kind of a sanguine worldview. And and that's why she was so tight. But she had 11 brothers and sisters, not 22, but, I think 6 boys and 4 girls or something like that. And a few of them died. And but she had a big family who she was really close to. And I was the only one, so I looked the Irish German, the German one, right? So I looked like a few of my uncles and aunts. Whereas my brothers and sisters were all looked the Italian, right? Look just like, curly hair, darker, browner skin, looked like they had a nice tan. They didn't have to wear 2 pounds of, Irish. Man, if the orange pinhead ever showed up like the way he looks when he wakes up in the morning, people will go, oh, because he is, he is pasty as smeg, he's smegma boy, he looks like smegma. Go look smegma up, and, he's got, whether it's a toupee or just a few, it's like me, I have a few strands here. I could do this, but I don't. I just kind of pull it back. I have it long enough so I can put it in a little ponytail so it doesn't go, wow. Because when I don't do that, it goes, wow. Right. So anyway, no one's chatting. There's 2 of you there, 32 minutes and 32 seconds, right? So I've been, meandering through this storyline here, but it pretty much has the, what I wanted to talk about was, first off, so I told you about my high school experience, right? And so between the 2 different prep schools, and I kind of, they, my cardinal came and got me, right? And because the crazy, priests were going to kill me because I was, I was like Che Guevara, right? Because I organized all the slaves into a union, and then when the parents' weekend happened, I had them go on strike. So they didn't feed the parents, they didn't clean up the place, they didn't mow the lawn, they didn't make the flowers look pretty, they didn't change the beds. They had a really bad septic system that they had to stay on top to, and they didn't. So it whoa. And I said, slowly we will go into this. And then when the parents show up, that's when we made paper chains and we chained ourselves together and marched with signs. We're not, we're slaves, and the parents said, what? Huh? What? And basically those people became unchained. One of those parents was sympathetic enough and was a lawyer and sued the school and got reparations, and their indenturedness was dropped, and so they had to become employees with insurance and a salary, and they got to eat and live there, and their kids got to go to school at this prestigious prep school, and they put a college fund together for the kid. I didn't do it all myself, but I said, guys, come on. You got to stand up for yourself, and this is how we're going to do it, And all I said is, okay, we're going to make, it's because we'd had all this paste and paper and we made paper chains, right? And I kind of strategized because I was already at war with this place, right? And this was just another, another front. But they did it all. I just gave them the ideas, and that's kind of what I do, right? That's why I'm doing this channel. I want you guys to get out. And I thought that little dot there was gook on my screen, but it's really a doorknob on the door back there. Anyway, see, I'm like a cat. I can be distracted just by lint. And so, the Franciscan crew really wanted. I mean, they tied me to fire pipes and beat me with, baseball bats and 2x4s, and I ended up in a hospital, broken collarbone and elbow, and I've been busted up by nuns and priests more than anything else, more than me falling down or out windows or all the. One time I built a house and we had a gigantic party, right? But we didn't build the deck, and it was built up on a mountain. And I don't get drunk, but this night I was, smoking and drinking and drank a little tea. And so I was like on another planet, and I decided I wanted to go, just go look at the stars. I opened up the door, walked out, and the deck wasn't there. So I fell the 20 feet from the door to the ground, and then I rolled down the hill about 200 yards through brambles and bushes, and the next morning they came and found me all bloody, like they were having too much of a good time. Where did Al go? Oh, I don't know. But when I came out the next morning and went down the hill to go to the store, I was like right by the driveway in this bramble bush. The Catholic Church beat me up more than that. I didn't break any bones doing that, but and I've done pretty amazing. I told you the last one about how I drove up a cliff. And the car was totally just. I ended up at the bottom of the valley with the steering wheel in my hand and sitting in a bucket seat on the ground. There was nothing left of the van, just me holding the steering wheel and me in the seat. And luckily, the belt was attached to the seat and not to the van. Like today, most safety belts are attached to the runner of the ceiling, right? If that had been in that truck, the thing would have wrapped around my head and clipped my head off. But since it was attached to the seat, it kind of kept me in the seat. And so I ended up at the bottom of the valley in the seat with the steering wheel in my hand. And I didn't break anything there, but nuns, I got beat up in the first grade, broken orbit, broken jaw, and she broke my fingers, one at a time, just a little sexually perverted. And then this Franciscan priest who had, leg problems and had crutches. I used to sneak into his room and cut his crutches and then stick them back together with super glue and then, put, stain so you couldn't see where the cut was. And so he'd be on his crutches. And if he was on a flat plane, not bad. But if he was going up or down, especially going downstairs, they would snap. And I did that to him 16 times. So that guy, he did have, rights to, taking me out. And I did other things like when we did this thing, to totally tell the parents how bad things were here. I basically, so I had to wake up at 3 a.m. and milk the cows and the goats, right? They had a farm. And I had to muck out this. And then I had to go to the kitchen and start cooking breakfast. And then I had to serve breakfast, right? Then I had to go to school. I basically had I had to eat everything on the run. And that's kind of one reason why I failed out of that school, because I had no time. The only classes I really did well in was physics and astrophysics, because that guy was great. He was a priest, and he was half of NASA is full of nuns and priests, and NASA. The Catholic Church owns NASA. Half of it's Roman, Vatican, and the other half is Nazis. And Werner von Braun is the poster boy of the Nazis in NASA. And Durna Durna was, the guy. He was a nasty dude. He killed thousands of people in the death camps, as forcing them to work in terrible places and dangerous. And they didn't work hard enough. They would pin them to the ceiling and leave them alive up there, and then they leave them up there dead. When the troops came in and found in the death camps right next to them all these underground factories, and they found thousands of people stuck to the ceiling. And they never showed movies of that. And that was Durna, and Durna ran Bell, and Bell made all of the X aircraft, right? And you really need to go to dark journalism and see his X series, because X means secret, right? And there's a way of classifying something secret. So but secrets come out. But there's this steganography, right? Which is a way of coding things right out in the open, right? And unless you know what you're looking at, you just think it's something, right? Just a story or facts and figures. But unless you know what you're looking at, so there's ways of coding things. But if you have the key, you can read it like a book. That's what I used to do. So I was taught to do by this priest in that school, because he realized this kid is not like everybody else. He has a way of looking at stuff. So he explained to me about this ethnography, right? And the only other person I ever heard talk about it was the guy who's doing dark journalism, right? And so that priest was really good, right? And he let me do whatever the heck I want. He gave me an A. Everybody gave me an F. He gave me an A, right? So that's why I got out of there with a 63 average instead of like a 0 average, right? So, and he taught me a lot about what the technological world really was. And by that time, I was working for Grandpa Stahl, and I was Mr. Tesla. That was another thing he liked about me. So, the head guy at that seminary was my friend. The second in charge was my friend. And so the English teacher there used to whip me and, put me in a corner with a dunce hat on. And that guy walked in one day and saw that, and he said, "Listen, I'm going to beat that," because he had been a Dartmouth football player, and then he was, this like killer in World War II and Korea, and then he decided he was going to be, he wasn't a Catholic priest, but he found Jesus, and he was the second in charge of that place, and he ran the football team, and so he was, and he had everybody doing weights, and so he really liked me, and he liked to write poetry, right, and stories, like sci-fi. He liked sci-fi. He turned me on to sci-fi. So when I started, and I was already kind of a sci-fi guy, and so he told the English guy, okay, he's going to study under me. So I had this physics teacher, priest, who was really good, and then this, killer for Christ, who was the football, the second in charge and the football coach. And so I got 2 A's, from my physics and from this guy teaching me English, right? But F's for everything else, right? Because they were all Franciscan and Jesuit priests, and they were all, when people say, "Oh, you're just paranoid," well, I was, I ended up in the hospital twice. It's not quite, when you think they're after you and you end in the hospital, then, and that's, that was a really good thing, because that was a really short, from September to March, I was at that school, right? And we had 2 pretty big vacations. We had a Christmas thing that lasted 2 weeks and a spring thing that lasted a week. And anyway, long or the short of it, my cardinal came and got me, because I was not going to last until May, right? So he came and got me, and he had a apartment in St. Patrick's along with the bishop. They had really nice. At St. Patrick's on Fifth Avenue, it's not just a big church. It's got all kinds of stuff all around it. And they own a lot of real estate all over Fifth Avenue. So anyway, so so I get thrown out. I'm with at St. Patrick's. My parents come home and they're really pissed because they've been globe trotting, and so the Cardinal says, you got to come home and get your son. And they said, we don't want to do that. They're all out of the house. That's why we sent them to prep school, because they had moved into really fancy digs on Park Avenue. And they were living a good life. My dad's business was doing really well. He was, and he really realized how to make money and not have to work too hard. Right. So he was, and so he was doing international business. So he was taking my mom all over the place. Anyway, so around May, and so the Cardinal said, listen, I will get you a personal, sit down with the Pope, but you got to take your boy with you, So I guess I was 15, and they got me a passport, and we went to Ireland. They wanted to, my mom wanted to see Ireland. So we drove all over Ireland, and it was like, and so it was gray, and they stayed on the East Coast. They went all over the East Coast. They didn't go to the West Coast at all, right? They went all over to the East Coast, and it was like one gray, drab, Catholic concentration camp after the next, an Irish town. And we got into Dublin, and boy, Dublin was fun. And we stayed at the fanciest, top of the line hotel, right? And my parents were in a suite where they booked me in the basement in the people who worked there. They had little rooms for them to stay at, right? And the low rent folk could rent a place there, and people who would come from other countries to work there would, could rent a thing for the week. So my dad put me down there, which was the most fun because I was, in this, there were probably 20, 30, 50 rooms down there. And they were all people, under 20, and half of them were all the maids and waitresses at the restaurants, right, and bars. And they were, between 18 and 22, and they were hot. And they had unlimited booze, unlimited food. There was a big common room. So it was one long frigging party, right? So my father, said, okay, we were there a week, we drove all around and went to Dublin, and we were there for 2 days. And he goes, listen, your mother and I are going to go to Rome to see the Pope, and then we're going to go a few other places for about 3 weeks. We're going to, you wouldn't like what we're going to do. So why don't you like it here? I was, yeah, it's fun. So I like it. So he gave me $1,000, right? And said, you can have, I set it up so you can eat in the restaurants, drink at a bar, get food in your room, whatever you want. You got room service, you got food, and you got this place for 3 weeks. And they also got me a kind of bus pass, transportation, right? And the place had like a cabbie kind of thing for that hotel. Meaning you ask the doorman to get you a cab, and they would get you one of their cars and drive wherever you wanted to go. So I took trips up the West Coast. I went to, Limerick and different places, And then they gave me, can you drive? Sure. So I had this girl, this maid girl who kind of got fired, or at least they wanted her to not work for a couple of weeks. So she and I, she, was my guide, and she took me up to West Coast. Anyway, so I spent 3 weeks there without my parents and had one heck of a time. And all these young people. So in this hotel, there were a lot of Germans and English and people who were, because this was the fanciest hotel in Dublin. And so if you worked there, you made pretty good money. And so other Europeans, Spanish, but there were a number of Germans there who also were going to Trinity. And that's kind of my first little blush with experiencing that. And we drink at these pubs. And man, you could get your fingers at the top of the bar, they'd stick a cigarette in your mouth and give you a glass of patties, And or a black and tan. And so that was me at 15. And I really realized, wow. And I had this at 14, this experience of going to um, Maine, right? And one summer I hitchhiked. I left a little note on my pillow when we lived in Long Island saying, I'm not running away. I'm taking a vacation. See you later. I'll give you a call when I get wherever I'm going. And I did. I got up to the Ryan Ranch, and I got there at 3 a.m, and I walked. First I took a bus from New York. I just went down 8th Avenue, went to the Greyhound bus station, and said I want to go to Maine. So I got a bus all the way to Portland, right? And North Bridgeton was, I don't know, 200 miles from Portland. So I hitchhiked from there to there. And it was, and the bus ride only cost, I don't know, $30, if that, And I basically, we were in Long Island. I kind of got up at like 4 a.m, left this little note, had my little pack, walked from our house to the Long Island Railroad, which is, I don't know, probably 12 miles. It was a nice little walk. And got on a Long Island Railroad train, got off that, walked about 4 blocks to the, bus station and took a bus to Portland. And then I hitchhiked from there to there. So I arrived at the Ryerson Ranch, and 3 a.m, I didn't want to go in. So I kind of sat on their front porch, and I was tired, and I laid down on the rug in front of the front door. And so I'm asleep on their porch, and Mr. Ryerson, he comes out in his wife's robe, and he goes out to see if the newspaper was there. He opens the door, he doesn't see me, and the screen door like hits me in the head. I go, oh, and the screen door kind of stops. He looks down, and there are my feet, and he goes and looks at the screen. Al, what are you doing here? I said, I came to visit. Do your parents know where you are? I just told him I was taking a vacation, and I would call him when I get here. And he goes, well, okay, come in. Let's have some coffee, and I'll make you breakfast. So the girls weren't up yet, his wife and the girls. He was always the first one up. And we talked, and I told him, what it was. And he says, so it's fine, you can stay here. You will call your parents. If it's okay with them, you can stay here for the summer. Not a problem. I got a lot of things you can do. He says, you're good. Last time we were here, you fixed a bunch of things for me. I was pretty amazed with your skill set. And, the ice house refrigeration is really, and I don't want to spend thousands of dollars. You take a look at it, you fix it. That'd be great. The farm out in the North 40, that, I've always wanted, there's, an electric service there where there's a trailer, but the house and the barn and none of those places have electricity. You could do that, and that would be great. And I said, yeah, okay. So he said, I'll pay you. And I said, well, you don't have to do this. No, you're going to need cash. So, stay here. We'll feed you. I'll pay you. Yeah. So we had breakfast. And, after an hour of our negotiations, he kind of bellowed, his wife, and girls, get up here. Guess who's here? And they all came in, and the oldest one was there, the middle one was there, and my sweetie was there. And they go, oh, wow. And the mother came over and kissed me, and she goes, have you had breakfast? And I said, yeah, we had coffee, and we had bacon and eggs. And she goes, well, that's just, your first breakfast. You need a second breakfast. And so she was a great cook. So she made waffles and lots of other things, and we had second, so we could all have second breakfast. And then Teresa and I, we went down, walked, down to where the docks were, got a sailboat and sailed the lake the first day, right? And by this time we were a little more experienced with our bodies, and I was like almost 16, and she was 16, and so we were more than just holding hands, but that we were very cool about it. We were. I had read the Kama Sutra, and I said, the real deal of intimacy is not the act, but everything that leads up to it, and the longer time that you can spend between that moment and starting, that's real intimacy. So we explored that, for that whole summer. And her mother was definitely a woman of the world, and she had all her girls understand the facts of life, and she was also a person of that ilk. I mean, you don't have to, you know, have the deed. You can do everything else, and satisfied the carnal drive. And so everybody was down with it, right? And that was 1968, and that's when we watched the Chicago riots, right? People think things are really bad now. Wow, they were not half as bad. They're not a tenth as bad as what things were between the death of Jack Kennedy and the debacle of Watergate, right? And the Vietnam War. We were during the Vietnam War started the end of World War II. I remember. So when we were in Ireland, this was an interesting one. Before my parents took off and left me alone in Dublin, I still was living down there, and I would meet them in the lobby for dinner. I would go to the bar and get a Patty's, like 16, and I just had one drink, and my dad was fine with one drink, not a problem. One glass of wine with dinner, not a problem. Do any more, if you get stupid, not good. Right. So I never liked getting stupid. I've only been drunk twice in my life, and so so I would be at the bar, and I was smoking. My dad smoked cigars and pipe, and so I was smoking a pipe. We went to a pipe store. He bought me a pipe, and so I was smoking my pipe, and they also had these really great cigarettes. Came in a box. They're called exports, right? They were really tasty and much better than any American cigarette. I never, I had friends who smoked, and I tried to smoke. What is this crap? But these export cigarettes were very tasty. So I would be either smoking my pipe or export and drinking my whiskey. And that's when my dad would come in and say, your mom's, going to meet us in a minute. I'll have a drink, and we talk. And what'd you do today? And my father was actually always, if he wasn't angry, if he wasn't pissed off, he was nice to hang out with, right? And I tell him he liked to hear what I did, what experiences, because I wasn't with them. They were doing, shopping and whatever they were doing. And I was like, in the nitty gritty of, I went to this museum, I went to this place, I went to the school, I went to down by the river. Anyway, so I did a lot of that. I said, Dad, there's this whole thing, and down on the river, the whole nother city. It's the old Dublin. It's really amazing, and I tell him stories about it. So he'd like that. And then we go to dinner, and I would tell my mother about my exploits, and that was good, right? Driving around with them in a car was not fun. And so that's why they said, okay, that week of driving around, you were so, because I was, whenever I'm like my head gets clogged up and my lungs get clogged up, and I was a sick kid. So my mom always, she ran a hospital. So she was always, so the time that we drove around Ireland and the East Coast, where it was always raining and dreary, she went into a store, and I always took Benadryl, right? So she went in there, you got any Benadryl? I goes, oh yeah, I got Benadryl right here. Well, took it. Well, she says, here, Al, just drink it out of the bottle. Here, keep the bottle. So glug, glug, glug. And I'm like, whoa, because I look at the bottle and it has codeine in it. Half of that bottle of Benadryl was codeine. And my mom didn't even read it. So, I drank the whole thing, and then The next day we get in a car and I'm coughing and go into a town. She gets me like 5 bottles. She says, here, just hold on to this. Take what you need. And so I was like, for that week, so I wasn't that much fun, I was like slow and, and they just chalked it up to being a teenager and getting thrown out of, having war with the Catholic Church. So anyway, that's another reason they weren't too keen on having me to see the Pope, because I was like, wow. So that's why they left me in Dublin. So, and that's why Mrs. R was really great, because she was a Dublin girl. And so I would talk about Dublin, and she was like, oh, honey, we have to go back to Ireland. But anyway, so we're at this fancy hotel, and my dad, we're walking through the lobby, and he goes, oh, wow, I want you to meet somebody. He goes over and taps this guy on the shoulder, and it's General, the guy who was the general who shepherded who ran the Manhattan Project. What's his name? Not Tibbets. That was the criminal who flew the plane. But anyway, so that general, his name, it's not LeMay. There's, it'll come to me. But anyway, there the guy is. And the guy turns around and goes, oh, Colonel D, how you doing? You're looking good. And he's still a general, but he's in a suit. And my father goes, sir, what are you doing in Ireland? Oh, we're having a little gathering, a NATO strategic gathering. Oh. And he goes, would you like to sit in on that? And my father said, sure, because, that was part of what he did. He planned for the Armageddon of the world. He was part of Strategic Air Command. Anyway, so my dad goes, they're gonna, we're gonna, next, I'm gonna go have this meeting later with these guys, but they're gonna meet after dinner at the, have a few drinks at the bar. You can, So I sat there, and there was General LeMay, bombed, he's the guy who firebombed Dresden. And what was this guy's name? The atomic bomb guy. Oh. And Tibbets was actually there, which was like, whoa, what is this guy doing here? And a few other folk, and some people from the AEC, and there I was, 14 years old, 15 years old, sitting amongst all these generals and men of death. And they were commonly talking right there in that bar about, the plans to start the Third World War with Russia, And I'm like, so, these guys were talking like it's going to happen tomorrow. That's why they're having this meeting in Dublin. No one would notice them here. And it didn't happen. So no matter how weird and stuff looks, probably 90% positive end of the world ain't going to happen. But that other 10, that asteroid did hit this Earth. The big wave did come. And we've had like an asteroid kind of broke up over, North America and smashed into Chicago. That's what took out Chicago with the big fire. Because they had two big fires. One when it was a wood city in like the 1860s. And then another one when it was a steel and concrete city in the 1880s, right? And we also had a CMG that hit the Earth in the 1880s, just when, we weren't quite a telegenic community. We had, but we didn't have electricity a lot, and we didn't have, nothing was, no semiconductors, no radios, no anything. But that thing was so strong, it fried every telephone wire and telegraph wire on the planet. And the CMG was kind of pointed at the United States. I mean, it affected the rest of the world, but the folks on the other side didn't quite get it as bad as we did. And out west, where we had all of these long rails going along, from the east to the west, out there in the cowboy land, they were like two conductors, and they were like two men. So the steel rails, they had to replace them all because they were bent up all over the place. They were like pushed apart by hundreds of yards, and where it went through cities and towns, where the railroad went through those major obliterated those little towns that were just starting to grow. And in the 1840s, I think it was, there was a earthquake out there in Central or South America that caused a tsunami to wipe out everything, along, the Gulf of Mexico, and everything from like Mexico to Georgia was right, and went in 1,200 miles, and it's called the Mud Flood. You should check that out, right? And so, Lena, you're the only one, sweetie. So, how you doing? And what's going on there in Sweden? I've been just, last night we've had a few good chats, and they were all, you were a major part of the beauty of the chats in the last few nights because you've been there. So I love the fact you're there. So you're in Sweden. So what is it, 8 o'clock p.m. where you are? What's going on? How you doing? Helena, what are you doing for fun? What's making you the happiest? How can I make you happier? What do you want to hear about? What do you want to talk about? Lena, have you tried to get a hold of me at the Dude Awake 42 at Gmail? I'd love it if you did. I'd love to have a one-on-one with you. There's 4 of you. So come on, Lena, say something. And some more. So Lena showed that you can actually chat. Yo. Love you, Lena. So Lena, have any of you guys checked out, again, the kind of channel, each time I've suggested, like, there's a guy named Tom Hartman, who's pretty interesting. He's, quote unquote liberal, but he's read a lot of books, so he's kind of getting what it is. And the other interesting thing, Lena, I'd love you to talk about. So I was talking about being in Ireland in the 60s, and then in, the latter 60s and early 70s and up to the 80s, I traveled Europe and Asia and North Africa a lot, right? Because I went to Sweden and found that the Swedish government paid for people's vacations. I don't know if they do it anymore. And so you could sign up to go anywhere in the world, right? And they would fly you there, and they'd pay for the tourists and the meals and the hotel room and put you back on the airplane, right? Because folks in Sweden, half the year total dark, the other half the sun never sets. People a little, bipolar there. And it's environmental, because we are really susceptible to our sun's exposure. And anyway, so for a number of years, would go to Sweden, go visit my friends in Stockholm and Gothenburg and Forshaga and a few other little towns. And then we would all go to Stockholm, go to the airport, see what was up on the bulletin board. If you're ready to get on the airplane, you could just walk on there. You'd go to the thing, hey, I want to take flight so-and-so. I'm a citizen. And I had a international driver's license that said I lived in Forshaga, Sweden. So I would show them that. And they said, fine. And they just say, okay, where you want to go? I tell them. They would give me the boarding pass, and they would give me a visa that showed that I was coming from Sweden, and I was a Swedish citizen. So I could go to places like Iran and Iraq and Syria and Libya and not be an American. I had this piece of paper that says I came from Sweden, right? And they just look at me, with a Hawaiian shirt and mirrored sunglasses and cowboy boots and go, well, all of you Swedes are kind of weird. But I traveled Europe a lot on that, especially when the EU, before the EU, there was a common market and they had thing where, I had this international driver's license. There was no real borders then either in the 70s. And so I would travel and I spent a good deal of time in Germany. And I went to Hamburg and I went to Dresden because I wanted to see the effect. Dresden was a toy town, and I went to school in a toy town, and so Winchton, Massachusetts, I always envisioned to be like Dresden, but Dresden was a city of like 250,000 people. Winchton was a town of like 5,000 people. But anyway, I went to Dresden, and I just wanted to talk to people who weren't Nazis, who were just plain citizens who were old enough to remember what Germany was in World War One, between World War One and World War Two, and the rise of Adolf, the war, and post-war. I wanted to understand that. And I did. I spent, I don't know, Munich, I spent probably 4 months in, Dresden, probably 3 months. And I didn't go in a hotel. I first, found a bed and breakfast or place. And then if I could stay there, I want to stay here a month or two, and they would either say, oh, yeah, you can, that, or we have another place where we rent out apartments. Why don't you go rent instead? Because the bed and breakfast, I probably could make more money because the flow of people, even though it was pretty cheap. So both of those places, I got apartments, and they were like single room occupancy, room, bathroom, toilet, no shower. You had to go to a public bath, which was fine. I mean, I liked doing that because I was with the folk. And it enabled, I'm a polyglot, meaning if I'm living someplace, I can learn to speak the language relatively easily. Writing it, another question. But speaking it, pretty easy, enough to, get around and make people feel relatively comfortable. And then they realize, oh, you're an American, so let me speak English to you so I can practice my English, So, and that's the best way to learn a language, where they kind of can speak English and I can, try to speak their language. So I, spoke, German, and they really liked the fact that I wanted to know them and their history and not tell them who they were and what their history was, right? So I got a lot of feedback. I mean, I got a real understanding. And in the years of the 70s, that's when I did my most world traveling that I did on my own, right? Or I did with Don. The other world traveling I did as a scholar. I mean, I was always with a group of people that we were going to study something. So that's a whole different story. But in Germany, what I saw was that the German people, in essence, are very idealistic and I don't want to say naive, but they want to believe in their law. Yeah? And so it's easy for them to be beguiled. People tell them what they want to hear, even though they're doing stuff that they may not like. They can go along with it. And the United States is just like, when I came back, I kept, as I traveled, the best thing to understand about your own country is to go live someplace else. And that gives you perspective on your own country. And the United States has, always been we've always wanted to believe, when we obliterated 6 million indigenous people just in North America. Yeah, it took about 300 years to do it. But we went along, the only good Indians are dead Indian, savages. Who were the savages? The Indians went there, they were savages because they didn't have guns and didn't have written language, but they were nice, and they really didn't really start protecting themselves until they realized that these guys are going to kill us all, So the movie The Last of the Mohicans, that's a good take on that, or Little Big Man. Both those movies will give you a good sense of what it was. So there's 4 of you there. So Landon, don't you have anything more to say than yo? Come on. What you're a folk who came from Eastern Europe and then went to Sweden, right? So you have that same perspective. You came from your motherland and went to another country, and so that should give you a pretty good sense of that dynamic, a dialectic. And I'd love to hear your point of view. That's what the chat's for. I want to hear your point of view. And there's this channel on YouTube called Dark Journalism. And the guy, let's see. Oh, there's Jane. Yep. Jane, have you done any world traveling? Have you been able to have that experience of the perspective of your country here? And we are now we have always been in a place that we have been basically, the American boon, American Nazi Party was a big thing here. They had people in Congress. People think that our government has always been Democrats and Republicans. No, we were a collective. We had the Labor Party, the Socialist Party, the Communist Party, the all the fractional parties like the American Boon, the Independents, Republicans, Democrats, and the Congress was full of lots of different people. So deals had to be made, and that's why we had, an equilibrium. But now what we have is the, fascist, plutocratic, schmegma party. The Democrats and Republicans, two wings of the same corporate bird. So, people, after giving corporations and the uber rich a $2 trillion a year, welfare package, the Senate goes, we're going to have to do something with those entitlements for people like your Social Security. Well, that's not an entitlement. You worked and put money into that. That was a retirement plan. And these morons are looking at it like, oh, we got to take that away from people. Oh, Medicare, they really shouldn't have that. Every other industrial country in the world has single payer health care, but we pay the most for health care. And so that's the problem. The big pharma doesn't want to let it go, Let's see. That's funny. Today, from let's see if I gotta get where are my other glasses. This chat is just too small. So funny today on Mojo from India, a woman thought she was the Buddha. Well, she is the Buddha. We're all the Buddha, and the more we can act like the Buddha, the better the world would be. That's for sure. So here I am up close. This is the only way I can read the chat. So we are kind of, if you look at the carrot pinheads rallies, they look a lot like the Nuremberg rally. Lenny, what's her name, filmed and, orchestrated and designed the set of those things. And you should go watch those and then compare them to the carrot head pinhead, right? No lie. No lie? No. No baba boo boo. No do 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 do. That's a reggae song. So we are on really strange ground, but we've always been on strange ground. See, that's the real thick of it, is that people don't realize that we're just easing. We're already in a fascist land, right? But we're easing into a place where, and that's why we were given the carrot pinhead, because he does something unbelievable. Any one of the 20 things he does a day, most normal politicians would get thrown out, but And that Gary Hart just had a little flirtation with a woman. Bingo, he's not president, right? Because he was too much of, thinking about people. Not been to Europe. Well, America's so big. Before I struck out, when I was, between 9 and 16, first, I traveled all around in New York City, right? And so that's like traveling all around Europe, And then 14 was when I left this little note. But before then, 13, I used to hitchhike a lot, right? Around my neighborhood, because I lived in a rural area, so I met lots of different people that way, And then we moved back to New York City and I worked for Grandpa Stoll and, was all over the place there. And so that was like traveling through Europe. But between 14 and 15, I hitchhiked around America, and 16 too, and 17. But, starting, 14, 15, 16, 17, I also went, because they had this thing called Freddie Laker Airlines. It was like, he had an office on 42nd Street where the Pan Am building was, which was right on top of, not Penn Station, but the other station, which was really the beautiful, unbelievable railroad station, like a temple to the railroad, Grand Central, that was what it was called. And they had this little office right where the bridge was at part of Park Avenue. Park Avenue smashed into Grand Central and then kind of went around it and then went over this bridge and then back down there until it ran into its own little park around 16th Street. But anyway, they had a shop there that you walked in, and anytime between when they opened at 8 o'clock in the morning, and they might have been open 24/7, I'm not quite sure. But between 8 in the morning and 1 or 2 in the afternoon, or maybe even later, or up to the time when the bus would take you to the airport, you could buy a ticket to go from New York to Heathrow for the first Freddie Laker ticket I bought. It was $60 one way, right? And so the bus left, I think, around 4:35 o'clock, maybe a little bit before rush hour or a little bit after rush hour. I'm not quite sure, but it would be there. And there would be 2 buses because he had one. First, he had 707s, but then he had one 747. So he would take about 300 people, in one shot. So most of the people got there on their own, but they had this bus that they had 2 or 3 buses that, depending on how many seats they sold, and they said, "Oh, I'm going to come from here." So you go there, get on the bus, and it wasn't like you weren't squished in. That was kind of a very, big seats, room for your legs, and they actually had a stewardess, right? And she had a little thing back where the toilet was, and the back seat wasn't there. She had like a little place, and she had hors d'oeuvres and cocktails, right? You could have, a beer, a whiskey, or champagne, right? And you could have as much as you want. So you got on the bus, took a leisure, and they would take the bus ride. You would have all your paperwork done at that place where you bought your ticket. So when you got on that bus, they wouldn't take you because they didn't have a gate. They had a place where they parked the airplane, and the bus would drive on to the tarmac, and you get off the bus, you walk up the steps, get in the airplane. It wasn't going through any of the airport at all. And they take the bags out of the bottom of the bus, put them in the airplane, right? They put the little sticker on your thing, and so you would get on the airplane. Again, it was all one class. There was no first, second, third class, all one class, and it was relatively comfortable. But the people in third class didn't get squished in. They were like, it's regular, about 280 kind of people on the airplane, enough to be semi-roomy, and they actually had a bar on that too, right? But they had stewardesses that would and you got a meal. First you got little hors d'oeuvres and a drink, and you got into the flight, and then they gave you dinner, and they gave you a nice little pillow and a blanket, and you slept because you left New York, about 7 o'clock. And you got into Heathrow about 1 p.m, right? And it was great because, again, you landed at Heathrow, and they had the guy to stamp your passport. You came down the steps; he was right there, right? And they took the luggage off the airplane, and it was right there. And your bags, there, you got anything to declare? No, and they never looked in the bags. And they put it on the bus, and they would drive you into London. And when you were buying your airplane ticket, you could get 3 days in their little bed and breakfast hotel in London, right? And you could also get a Euro pass, for, a month, 3 months, 6 months, a year, right? And so that's what I did. So for less than $100, I could fly to London, stay 3 nights there, get a Euro pass, get on the train to Paris. So the train would roll this is before the tunnel, would roll to Swansea, or one of the train ports, and you would take a ferry to either Stockholm, or what's the place starts with L in France, or someplace in the Mediterranean, right? With a Euro pass, right? And then get on a train and go wherever the heck you wanted to go. And so I did that at least 10 times, and it cost me $100 to do that, right? And then wherever I stayed, but I would go to a city. I roam around and find a town or a city, mostly a city, that I like, and I would find a place I could rent for a month or 3 weeks or a week, and stay there and try to feel the sense of what it was, And I did the same thing in America. And once I started traveling when I got older, the thing I learned is, when you come in from your home place and you're going to go stay in a place for more than a week, you didn't have to bring anything except the stuff that you really, really needed or wanted. That's it, a couple sets of socks, 2 pants, 2 shoes, 3 or 4 shirts, coat. That's about it, because you could buy everything else really cheap. And I started, second time I went to Ireland, stayed there a while. I started, and I was living with Archie, and, so, I didn't have to pay rent. I would just be his assistant and travel around. And how I got into Glendore, he had a really beautiful house in Glendore, and he had another one in Galway. And so I could stay at those places. And I stayed in his, I stayed in Glendore a lot, especially once I hooked up with the doctor. But I would just go to the tinker sales, where you could buy clothes and stuff, like a flea market. And the tinkers, the gypsies, had these things all over the place. And I would buy tools, I'd buy, screwdriver, pliers, a tester, and then I'd be an electrician. And I'd be in these little towns. Nobody could fix their electric, so things just got worse and worse. And then the word, this guy fixed electric stuff. Not appliances, but your house, or your electric service, or things of that matter. And I did pretty good. So, being an electrician is a great trade. You can do it where electricity is the same everywhere, right? So my experience is that everybody is the same. We're all our relations. There is no difference. Nation states are an illusion. They're just a cultural kind of dynamic, And this New World Order motif, if it was based on being a human being of empathy, well, that'd be one thing. But it's based on being a robot of consumption and manufacturing. And that's not a good thing, because consumption leads to using everything up. We live in a planet of abundance. And that's the real thing. It's like gold has value, and so everything, we live for the gold, and air is free, so we pollute the frigging air, until we can't breathe it, because it's free. So that's kind of where we're at, this place where we have lost our way. Now, since the Tower of Babel fell about, 250,000 years ago, we have been on this path of consumer mindless consumption, and the willy-nilly attitude of not appreciating love's co-creation. The only thing that matters, right? So this post-apocalyptic world that we're in, and that means the apocalypse has already occurred, and we're just living with the flotsam and jetsam of it. And if you're living in Syria now, well, you're having the worst part of the flotsam and jetsam. If you're in China and the Hubei province where 19 got started, well, you're in the worst part of the flotsam and jetsam. So, but all of this gives us this window of opportunity. I've been talking about it for now almost a year. Window of opportunity. It's a countdown. We're counting down. Where as March shows up in a few weeks, we will go from 10 weeks to 10 months to 9 months of the countdown of the window of opportunity. So, all that really needs to be done is that you in your own little neighborhood, to in every day and every way take the piece of the earth and make it stronger, right? It's 2:05. I've been talking now for an hour and 31 minutes. 6 of you are here. 5 of you give me a thumbs up. Only Lena and Jane have said anything. And so this show is just not me talking. Kind of is, because there I am on the screen, but it's you chatting, right? And chatting with me and the cadre, so we can build. And if you look at the other live chats of the last few days, the good ones have been when, more than 8 people have been chatting and saying things that are, near and dear to their heart, and that's what makes this channel Dreamy Dreamland with your son, Sal Bob, your griot, special. Not me just telling you stories, but you interacting, right? Because that is going to be the key of survival of the human race. The planet's going to do fine. Oh, we have to save the planet. No, sorry. If an asteroid, the size of Manhattan can hit the Earth and kill everything, and everything comes back in less than, 1,000,000 years, well, then, it's this, the planet doesn't have to worry. Until the sun blows up, we really don't have to worry, for the planet anyway. Now, think about Homo sapiens sapiens. The thing of, what, the guy who said we evolved up this chain of hominids, no. That's just what it seems to be, because we can find, little artifacts that, oh, look at this species, look at this cohort, look at this, right? And it's just like anthropology, which is such a pinhead discipline. It's not even a discipline. It's not a science. None of those psychology, sociology, anthropology, political science, none of them, they're not science. No, they're opinion, And all of them were based by white men to prove they were superior above everybody else, especially anthropology, please. And Nora Sullivan, really what you need, if you're going to read any anthropology, read books written by women. Really, any books. Women write way better books than men, pretty much. Not, totally, but pretty much. And in any of those disciplines, the ones that really are, okay, look at that. Because basically women have been so limited, so, put off to the side. And invention is the mother of invention. It's not, necessity is the mother of invention because women, I worked at a really good friend who was in the patent library in DC. And when I was at, College Park in Maryland, I would hang out with him. He was the most fun, most interesting, And when the city was covered in, tear gas, the Library of Congress had really good filtration. They didn't want those books to deteriorate. So I would, just kind of go see him and get away from the tear gas. And I would look up because he had access to everything. And this in the 70s, he had computers, way before anybody else had computers, the federal government. And I could look up anything. And because it was the Library of Congress and the Patent Library. And so I looked up all of these, real famous, patents, and like the McCormick Reaper and the cotton gin and steam, certain elements of the steam engine and electrical things. And what was truly interesting was that they were all invented by women and Black people, because they were in the fields dealing with the problems. And so they did it. And then the husband, who was the only guy McCormick, he was a white male and he owned property, so he could vote. He was registered. He was the only person legally to put his name on the patent. And they wrote the law that way. And they still, even, that there were a lot of women in Congress, they still, you look at Nancy Pelosi, you swear that she's got junk, Concept. And yes, the race problem, like I said, it was designed to prove that white men were superior, right? And I've never, the smartest people I've ever met were women, not guys. There are a few men who've been, instrumental in my life, and they had a more gentle personality. I mean, even though, like George Christie, you see what he did, and my friend Billy Kluver, these men were rich, powerful white men of great intellect and science, but everything they did was for war, right? And when they got older, they kind of regretted it, but they didn't, because it gave them this power that they would have never had before. But they tried to do good within the context of, what, their overlords saw in them, just like what they were doing with me, trying to give me access to things so I could be the next generation of them. Right? And I never did. I mean, I was always, they were my, mentors, and I gave them due respect, that way. And they really, and I gave them, my thought process, which was, oh, wow, can I use that? Sure, Billy. So what is DYNAMO? Dynamo Home. Dynamo Home. Yep. Okay, got it. I didn't get that close to it. Parts of that. Dynamo Home. Yep. That's it. So, in your own neighborhoods, you have to build communities that can be the dynamo. That's going to, Jane, you just gave me an idea. Anthony. No, it was Jane who did that. Hey, there's Anthony. Have you ever been to Antarctica? Nope, didn't make it to there. I got close. I went to Tasmania, where they built a gigantic dam, enough electricity for 20 million people. And this in Tasmania, which is this little island at the most southerly, between Australia and the Antarctic is, or South Pole is this little island, Tasmania. And all it has is is sheep and about 200,000 people, right? And it has no factories, no nothing. And the U.S. Defense Department, through the NID, built one of the world's largest dams because of the Gordon Ridge. It rains there 24/7, 360, right? And they have these trees, the Yum pine, biggest trees in the world. They're like, they look like, each tree looks like the Saturn V rocket, right? It's like 30 stories high. It says, 20 meters in diameter. And the valley that had, half of those trees, they put a dam and flooded the whole valley. And the trees were so big they couldn't get them out of there, so they just left them there. And so the lake that was made by the Gordon Lake, or what did they call it? Maybe the Victoria Lake. They named it after some English king or queen. Flooded these trees, and that lake was like 300 feet deep. So when you flew over that thing, it was this gigantic lake, a really big lake, bigger than any of the Finger Lakes in upstate New York. And if you put them all together, it would probably be not as big as the Great Lakes, but really a big lake, the whole valley of this mountain range. And you fly over it, it's a gigantic lake, and it's, all these little Christmas trees are at the top, right? Which are the tops of these Yum pine trees that are 300 feet high, And so when I first went to Australia, Pan Am lost all our luggage, threw us in a tizzy, wouldn't give it, the international law states that they have to replace your stuff right there and then and give you X amount of money if you can prove how much everything was worth. And I had that. I knew that, if we were going to take a lot of stuff, I was prepared. And so when we were landed in Sydney, and my friend Neil was there to greet us, and we went to get the bags, and they weren't there. And we went to the office to wear our bags, and they said, "Oh, they're not on the airplane." And I pulled out, the international law I had in my hand, and then I had all the receipts of what everything was worth. And then I had at the Pan Am office, they had a place, if you were taking an international flight, you could certify all of that information by a Pan Am officer, and he would send you give you this note saying, yes, this is what, the person who has this note should get this much money if you lose their luggage. And the guy at the airport said, screw it. Nope, not going to do it. If you want to, you can't do anything. We have no laws here that protect you. You can't go find a lawyer. You can't sue us. Sorry, if you want to deal with this, you're going to have to get on the airplane and pay for another ticket and fly back to New York and yell at the people in New York. But we're not going to do anything. But it's an international law. Too bad. At my leisure, I actually went to the U.S. Representative there in Sydney and showed him. He goes, well, we really don't pursue this. Sorry. So my friend Neil got me a job working for a friend of his who owned a gigantic electrical engineering firm, where everyone in that firm wore white shirts, black ties, and had their black pants and had black shoes and had their slide rule, on their hip. And I went to work the first day to meet the boss, and I had, a Hawaiian shirt and a handbag, and was wearing a skirt and had flip-flops. And because I was living in a house with a bunch of transgendered folk, and so they dressed me to go to this, corporate thing. And I had this great handbag. It was a beaded handbag with the beads made I still have it, a kangaroo over the thing. That was my guy goes, what's that? I said, oh, that's my briefcase. And he laughed. And, we sat there and he kind of grilled me a little bit about being an electrical engineer. And he goes, wow, you really know your stuff. I said, not only do I know my stuff, I have actually worked on things that you guys do. So I not only went to school and learned about this stuff, I actually did it. And I did it in the field. So he had me do certain, field equations, and I did them like on paper without a slide rule. And got it close, I didn't, I got the first three numbers before the decimal point and the next three numbers after the decimal point. And then I stopped. I said, after that, you don't need to worry about it. He goes, yeah, you're my guy. So I went to work there. And after 2 weeks, he calls me in the office and he slides an envelope towards me. And it has $5,000 in it. And I go, wow, what's this for? He goes, well, I'm changing your work dynamic. I says, what? He says, well, you're driving these guys nuts. You do the job better than they do. You come in a skirt and flip-flops and a handbag, and you don't even have a slide rule. You do all the math, in your head or on a piece of paper. This is like very annoying to them. And there's like 100 of them and one of you. So I have to kind of go with those guys. So they basically were about to have an uprising if you stayed here. I go, okay, that's cool. You give me $5,000 just to leave? Not a problem. He goes, no. I'm giving you $5,000 as just a down payment. I go, what do you mean? He goes, well, you don't look at the billing, but our jobs are like millions of dollars. We do dams, we do big factories, we do hospitals, we do, $1 million contracts. Well, I get the first payment. I'm just like you told me about being an electrician. You get the first payment, second payment, third payment, and then the fourth payment when it's all done. Well, I can never get them to pay me my first payment because the punch list always gets bigger and bigger. We never can quite get to the place where they're going to give me that last $400,000. And there are a lot of people who owe me a lot of money, and I can never get them to pay me because the legal system here is just like what you experienced at the airport. The rich own it. And yes, I'm well-to-do, but my clients are the uber rich, the really powerful, the guys who are lords here. So I can't get over on it. So what I want you to do is to be my punch list guy, because you will go on these jobs and everybody who works there will be just like the guys in my office, white shirt, black tie, black pants, black shoes, slide rule. And you go in there and you just go in there with a skirt and a Hawaiian shirt and your handbag briefcase and flip-flops and mirrored sunglasses and a cowboy hat. They will give me the check just to get rid of you. You just stay there, right? Because when you go there as a punch list guy, they have to pay you. So they have to put you up in a hotel. They have to pay for your meals. They have to, and you can stay there as long as you can and just annoy them. And I'm very good at that. So, I did a aluminum smelter, didn't last a week. And they gave him the $400,000, Did a hospital, didn't last 2 days. They gave him the $400,000, Then, these people owed him $2 million. And I got flown to Tasmania and then put on a helicopter and taken out to where this dam was, right? And it was just like 2001, like the guy getting on the Pan Am spaceship and then landing on the moon. It was like landing in the Gordon Ridge in Tasmania. It was like landing on the moon. And because everything was, didn't make sense. Like you fly over a lake and there are all these little Christmas trees on top. And so what the fuck is that? And they said, oh, that's, that we made a dam here. And anyway, so everything was underground. There was nothing on top of the ground. You at the helicopter pad, there was a little tin shed. You went in there, elevator took you underground, right? And underground, it was like straight out of, 2001. It was like you on a space station, right? And so we were going, met the guys, and they're looking at me. I'm wearing a skirt and a Hawaiian shirt and a cowboy hat and flip-flops, and I actually had cowboy boots on. And they showed me, we had, I got my ID. I actually took a picture of me. Really. And so, I got the clipboard and I got all the stuff. They're going through the checklist and they're explaining, and it's designed to survive a nuclear blast. And everything was designed to sign. I kept saying, so why is a dam and a hydro potential to supply 20 million people? I mean, there are not even 20 million people in Australia. Well, it's for the economic good of Tasmania. I said, what are you talking about? There's just sheep here. There's no aluminum. I could understand if you had aluminum smelting or a steel mill. You have none of that. I said, and we were so close to the Antarctic, so close to the South Pole. that I said the only thing that this is good for is because they had state-of-the-art transmission, DC high voltage, high frequency transmission. So they could, you know, transmit this current enough for 20 million people, 4,000 miles, 100,000 miles, around the world if they wanted to. And I said, the only thing I can see here is that you have a facility in Antarctica that you need a lot of electricity for. And then the really head honcho guy looked at me and goes, "Who are you? Where are you from?" And I showed him my little badge from the company I worked for, and my other little badge that showed that I worked for the Australian government, and said, I work for these guys. And he said, "Come with me." And he took me to a little room, it's like this, like about 8 by 8, and had a table and had two comfortable chairs and a little toilet in the behind that door. That was it, right? And they put me in a room and locked it. And there was that little hum, and the light. There was no light fixture. The room just was illuminated, right? So I'm waiting, and then this guy comes in. Again, he's got he's not wearing one of those J.C. Penney spacesuits. No, he was, he had a tailored suit and handmade shoes, and someone just gave him a $200 haircut. And he walks in and he goes, "Hi, I'm Bob." And I go, "Hi, Bob, I'm Al." He said, "Oh, I know who you are." And he had everything, to the day I was born. My parents, my father, my mother, everything about me, everywhere I went to school, everything about me. And he goes, "Well, you've been in Australia illegally for 3 years." I said, "Yes, but I've worked for the government of Australia for those 3 years. I worked for the Avant-Garde Theatre of Australia, owned and done by the federal government. I worked for," and he goes, yeah. "We're bad. It's not your fault. We're not going to, put you in jail but you got to leave, right? And you got to sign this." And I said, "What's that?" He goes, "That you won't say anything about what you've done in Australia." "What do you mean? Anything?" I said, "Just sign it." So I said, "Sure." So he goes, "So when do you want to leave?" And I said, "Well," he goes, "Well, you have to go back and you have to, get your wife." And he knew I was married. He knew Don. He had all of her everything. And he said, "So you can, how long you want? You want 6, 7 more months, another year?" I said, No. I said, "I don't know, somewhere between now and 5 months from now is good enough." He goes, "No problem." Again, he slides me an envelope. Again, there's another $5,000 in there. I mean, whenever I seem to get paid off or something, it's in increments of $5,000. Anyway, so he slips me that envelope, and then he gives me this card, and he says, "Do you have anything you need to get?" He goes, "And we're also sending your boss the money we owe him in total, plus a 20%, bother." So my boss was going to get like $5 million. And he goes, "But you're not doing this for him anymore, period. You're leaving. You're not doing anything. You can go around, have a good time, buy people meals, go visit your friends all over the place, but you cannot do any more of what you were doing, period. You got to go. Not this minute, but you got to go." And I said, "Okay." He goes, "No more getting involved in political things. No more, hanging out with the Aborigines. No more, dealing with the art world and inspiring them to do, political. No more. None of that. Zero. You can have a good time. Give you as much money as you want to go to the, places on the reefs." And we did that. We went off to this super duper rich place right on the Barrier Reef and spent a couple of weeks there snorkeling, So, so I said, "Fine, sure, sounds good to me." And see, that's what most moron folk do. They get so stuck in their belief structure that they go to the mat. They don't know how to navigate. Now, on the other side of the coin, people get bought off, and then they go and turn themselves into slime, into smegma, right? Go look up smegma. Not been to Europe. Hello, Zero. Good to see you, buddy. 11 plus viewers. Yep. I don't like the race concept. Yep, me neither. Mother of Invention. Yep. I always liked that band. Have you ever been to Antarctica? No, the closest was Tasmania. Uh, Doran, hey, how you doing? Sup, Al? I'm always good, always good. Getting a little hungry though. Been on for almost 2 hours. Ooh, look at that! 1 hour, 54 minutes and 54 seconds. So at 2 hours, 2 minutes and 22 seconds, I'm going to say goodnight. See you tonight. I figured out how to get the limited YouTube to at least get me to do this. So it's really cold outside. So I'm going to go get something to eat, bundle up, and go do a little work outside. Because now it's about 2 o'clock. It's hopefully it's about 40 degrees. It was 19 when I woke up this morning. Do you think we're on Mars? It feels like it in a lot of ways. Oh, you mean, are we there? Well, the Nazis went to Mars in 1941. They went to the moon in 1939. So the Nazis, the Thule Society, right? The Germans sent a bunch of their boys to California in the 1840s, where they perfected gravomagnetic propulsion. They called them airships. So go Google, Germans in California in the 1840s with airships. You'll be surprised. Do you believe in the flat Earth? Well, I've climbed mountains, and you kind of can see if the world was flat. You may not see all the way into infinite, but it would be flat. And I've climbed up mountains, and it does kind of curve. I have been in airplanes that have gone above 50,000 feet, and it does seem to curve. Not a whole, I can see why people. I had a friend of mine. Well, not a friend of my father's, who was this totally wacko dude who would fly, and he was the first guy. They put him in a balloon in a gondola, and they took him up above 150,000 feet. He was in a spacesuit, and he jumped out and parachuted. So when he was falling, he was going the speed of faster than he hit terminal velocity, but he was going faster than he was doing about 800 miles an hour. Right? He was going faster than the speed of sound, faster than a bullet. And then the air got thicker and thicker, and then automatically a little parachute popped up and kind of slowed him down before he got his main chute. But he basically was, when he was like going faster, almost the speed of sound, he hit a certain element of air. He started to tumble like this. So he totally went unconscious, and they expected that, and so that's why he, had this. Everything was automatic, but he jumped out at about 150. This guy was nuts. He was also. I don't know if you've ever seen any videos or films of the guys on rocket sleds, right? And they put this guy on the front of a rocket sled, no protection, just like a little kind of football leather helmet and not even goggles, and the wind was hitting him. His mouth was like this big, and his eyes would push. This guy was nuts, and he was just an adrenaline junkie, And so, I've talked to people who've been in outer space too, and they kind of say, maybe they were, you better tell everyone that it's round. So I can say I have no idea. From my cursory look at it, it seems like it's round. But I also looked at information that kind of points that it's flat. So I tell you, Anthony, I have no idea. I have, because what do I always say? Don't believe in me. I don't know, And I'm basically, what else do I say? Hey, Fish, good to see you, buddy. I'm glad some of the old timers are showing back up. So tonight I'm going to do one, if I can, like I did last night, around 8 o'clock, right? And what time is it now? 1 hour, 59 minutes, and 8 seconds. So I have no idea whether the Earth is flat or not, right? So I've looked into it a little bit, and a little bit I've looked into it. There's enough information on both sides to say you could believe anything you want, but I don't believe in anything I only have faith in love's co-creation. 50 million years ago, we lived on Mars. Yep. Not only Mars, Jane, our whole solar system was, a big empire. And there was a gigantic planet in the Goldilocks spot right in the middle of the solar system that there was a war. And, that whole scene out of Star Wars, our moon is the Death Star, right? And it blew a planet that was maybe 4 times bigger than Earth, because that's as big as a rock planet in our neighborhood can get. And it blew it up, and those guys were the giants, and they had big bones because the gravity was more, and it was a war, and it. If you read the Vedas, the Indian Vedas, they talk about it, and the whole Orc belt, the asteroid belt, is the refuse of that planet. So. Yes, we lived on Mars 50 million years ago. And 50 million years ago, we had a big, super duper empire going on here. That was basically, everything George Lucas said in the Star Wars movies was straight out of the mouth of Joseph Campbell. And Joseph Campbell told him stories of those times, And George Lucas sat at the feet of Joseph Campbell for a year. After he did a few movies, he wanted to do he had this idea, and he went to Joseph Campbell, and just like the guy who did Kubrick did 2001, he got it from Arthur C. Clarke, and Clarke was right there with the guy who made the movie, and that guy was amazing. He made why he got to how. That guy got to make 2001 was he did the films of the moon landing, because we had already been on the moon, and we couldn't let those guys. We were already there, and we were spending lots of money on lots of stuff, and we had to give the 2 pretend things that we were spending the money on, or the 3 pretend things, were going to the moon, the Cold War, and Vietnam. And that's where they said all the cash went to, but it didn't. A tenth of the money went to those things. The rest were going to the secret space fleet that the Navy had. When they said, we see flying saucers. Well, that was like the Hambu, that was the German guys. But the cigar-shaped things were the U.S. Navy. They took their submarines and put the anti-gravity drives on them. And if you go online and go look at Aviation and Space Weekly, right? Amazing magazine. And when I was at the UN, they had quite the interesting library there. And because I had was part of this NGO called Alternative Technology, I got, to get journals and magazines that you can't buy at the magazine store, not on the street. And one of them was Jan's Aviation. One of them was the French Jan's Aviation. The other one was the Russian Jan's Aviation, and Aviation and Space Weekly, right? And you didn't need the CIA. Everything that all these countries were doing, in aviation and space, in commercial and in military, was right in those magazines. And they were all weekly. What they were doing, what little nut or bolt or this or that, everything was there. And there's another great magazine called Space News. That was pretty amazing. So if you go look at those magazines, if you can find them, that were between 1947 and 1960, all they talk about is gravomagnetic propulsion, right? And how it's, and that's what the Philadelphia experiment was basically about, because it dimensionally took that ship from, where it was in Virginia and took it, where it was in New Jersey or Philly, and put it into Virginia, like, bloop, and then bloop, And World War II was a joke too, and a lot of people died, but, it wasn't about what they were fighting about, because the end of the war, the Nazis won. And that's what we have. That's what the New World Order is. It's the Third Reich, gang. And these guys are scared crapless because we are no longer in the Piscean age, we're in the Aquarian age, and all we have to do is click our feet, 3 times and say, "There's no place like love's co-creation." Bingo, we'll be back home, right? And if you go read, the guy who wrote, what's his name? Actually, he has a pod called Dreamland. He got it from Art Bell. He was a guy who wrote the first book about being abducted. What's his name? Starts with W. But anyway, he wrote a book called 2012. I mean, the first 10, they made a movie with Walken as the character in being abducted. And that book had sold millions, and the movie did pretty well. And then the next 10 books he wrote were about abductions, and so people got bored of that, so he had to write other books. So he did, and they did pretty good. What's his name? And so he wrote a book called 2012, just like everybody else wrote a book about 2012. Helium-3, yep. And so let's see. I think Mars has run, definitely on Mars. Yeah. Do you believe in a flat Earth? I just told you, 50 million years ago. Yep. Akron's did. Thanks. Helium-3. Okay. So, so the guy who did, Lolita and Dr. Strangelove and 2001, he did the fake movie thing, because if you watch the films and specifically look at the pictures, because the astronauts had Hasselblads, attached to their spacesuits. And they couldn't, with the helmets they had, they couldn't even look down, and so they couldn't focus. But if you go on NASA's website and look at the pictures they have, which they have thousands of them, they're all in focus. And not only are they all in focus, they're all like arranged like a photographer would make them, and they're lit. They got shadows. But the moon has no atmosphere. So the only way you get, on the moon, everything should either be black or white, blindingly white and deadly black. So you couldn't see anything. You look at these pictures, there's definition on everything, shadows everywhere. That couldn't happen on the moon. Sorry, And the film, the same thing, So this guy, and he was a real filmmaker for Kubrick. Thank you. Stanley was, they got 5 directors from Hollywood and said, "Hey, we want to do this." They didn't quite tell him exactly, but they quizzed him enough. And the only person who had the technical ability to do this was Kubrick. So they kind of brought him in, and they sat him down with, all the greats, Werner and all the rest, and said, "Listen, we're already on the moon, and it's all built out. And we got invisible paint, so people looking with telescopes see just rocks and craters. But it's all built, and not only that, it is the Death Star. It's an artificial satellite. And just gave him. He was like, and we want you to make a film to show the people of the Earth that we're going to the moon and we're bouncing around up there and everything's fine. If you do that, you can do whatever the frack you want, right? So he does it. And in that, he makes the technology. He develops the technology to do 2001. No one has done a space movie as good as 2001. And that was done in the 60s. No one has, even Spielberg, even, Lucas. Their movies look like toys compared to, 2001, right? Really believable stuff. Because based on what it really was, I'm sure half the stuff he shot, he went up to the moon and shot it, and Anyway, so So his deal was, okay, I'll do this, because when he did Lolita and he did Spartacus, he was always having to argue with, the guys in the main office. They was cutting his budget and cutting his edit and all the rest. So his deal was, from this point on, I can make whatever movie I want. No one's going to touch it, period. And so, that's, he does that. He gets them on the moon. And from that point on, he does 2001. And at the time they did 2001, that was MGM's most expensive movie, meaning they spent, I don't know, $15-16 million on it. And that in that time, that would be like 200 million or 300 million on the movie, right? And someone interviewed him. I read an article where the head of MGM, someone said, Stanley Kubrick is making this movie, this space movie. And the guy goes, yeah, he's making a movie. And they said, well, what we hear is that you guys have no restraints on him. He goes, well, I really don't know. He's doing it over in England. I'm really not aware. And this is the guy who is the head of MGM. And he's spending like $300 million. And he goes, I don't even know what he's doing. And he goes, have you seen any rushes? He goes, no. Have you seen any cut? No. Have we done? No, Stanley's doing it all, And every movie that Stanley did from that point on, was like The Shining. That movie is like, because it's a metaphor about everything. Basically it tells the people who watch the movie, we went to the moon, but we were already there, and I made a movie about it because the kid is sitting on the carpet, right? And he's got a T-shirt called a sweater. It says Apollo 11, right? And this tennis ball comes rolling at him, and it comes from, out of nowhere, and then rolls into the kid's peripheral, and the kid tries to get it, and then rolls into this room. And basically, the pattern on the carpet is exactly the pattern of the launch pad 39B. If you took the same kind of perspective that the ball rolling towards the kid would be like, quarter mile from the movable launch thing. And so that's what you see, the camera sees, and the ball runs into the kid's peripheral, and the kid rises. And so from that sight, you see the kid and his sweater, gets unfurled, and it's the Saturn V, and the kid's getting up, and it looks like the Saturn V is taking off, and it says Apollo 11, and the pattern of the rug is the same as the launch pad. It's like, and that's the kind of stuff that Stanley Kubrick did. And to make The Shining, those scenes of, them running through the hallways, they invented the Steadicam for that movie. So for every movie that Kubrick did after him doing the moon landing, so we went to the moon. We were on the moon. The Nazis were on the moon in 1939. Don't believe a word I say. Go check it out for yourself. Go read Joseph P. Farrell. Go read, and then read the people that he cites. The best thing about Joseph P. Farrell's books is that he's like, God, in thousands of sites. That if you go read those books that he read, you get even a bigger picture. Yeah, here we got uploaded. Kubrick, the guy eating bologna sandwiches, upset. Yep. Bell Labs. And Linton says, SYS. Yeah, we got loaded up. JD, you got to come and visit. We have great fun sitting around telling tales around the sacred fire pit. At least loaded. Exactly, Moan. At least loaded. Okay, how we doing? Oh, see, no, it's not 20. We'll wait till 22 minutes, and then I'm going to scan. When it's 2, I'm gonna jump off because I'm starting to get hungry. I haven't, I just had oatmeal. I need to make myself lunch. I made a really nice stew, so it should be. And the excess oatmeal, what I do is I make patties and fry them up like potato pancakes. Very good. Oatmeal fried like a pancake. Very good. So, again, going back to the factoid that everything is as it always been, but it's getting weirder, and we are kind of in line to be the next Nazi Germany. We already are Nazi Germany. And Nazi Germany came here in Operation Paperclip and took over. And we have just through increments, been turned, and we've always been a plutocratic fascist oligarchy. But we've been always kidding ourselves that we're this democracy. We're not that, right? But it's time for us to step up and be who we want to be. And we don't have to we don't have to make a political movement, but if we all, like I said, clicked our heels 3 times and we could be love's co-creation. And that's what, the hidden hand is the most scared about. That's why it's hidden. It's because it's a, this little kind of worm, this smegma that is stuck in our reptilian brain, and the thing that'll flush it out, be the antibiotic, is love's co-creation. And that's why I kind of want to make the Humanities Artist Trust International, that would be the 501(c)(3 that umbrellas, the Institute for Aesthetically Adept and Appropriate Technology, right? And there was a person talking last night. I hope they come on tonight. His name was something Art. And they were talking about the same, we need a new aesthetic, right? Based on love's co-creation, right? And this idea is getting out. I see it, it's not just my idea. It's really not my idea. It's love's co-creation's idea. And it's been around as, since as long as anything. And so it's just us coming to click our heels 3 times and going back home. That's what it is, right? And we're in this window of opportunity. And, if we need a pandemic plague where everyone dies, and that's the movie, the book, Whitley Strieber, that's the guy. Whitley Strieber wrote a book called 2012. And it was, everybody and his brother was writing books about 2012 and 2012. And Whitley's was, a novel. He kind of, he wrote, nonfiction stuff. He wrote fiction stuff, but he realized that he could tell more interesting truth through novels, like I do. Like if you go to my writing, xratted.blogspot.com, and go and look at my stuff. I'd love it if you did and commented on that site and commented on the dude awake 42 at Gmail. A number of people last night said, "Oh, why don't you drop me an email?" And they gave me their email addresses, in the quiet zone of the chat. And I just can't seem to make that work. Now, if you chat me, if you initiate contact and get a hold of me at thedudeawake42 at Gmail, I can, hit the little reply button and it gets right to you. That works great. But me trying to initiate it, I haven't, in the last 2 years, I haven't been able to do it once. I don't know why, but I think I'm doing it. Oh, look, it's not that hard. Oh, I can do it. Oh, I hit the little pussy thing. Oh, I did that. I wrote it out. I sent it. Oh, it says it's sending. And then when I go and look at things send, it's not sent. I have no idea why. So you want to get a hold of me, the dude awake at 42 at Gmail, and I will get back to you. It may take me a little time because a lot of people do, and I sometimes not look at it, and then I have to go, take 1 day a week and go through everything in the last month and say who I didn't get a hold of. But I'll do it. It may take a day, or may take a couple of days, may take a week, but I'll do it. I'm good at it. Just like I'm pretty good at putting these things up so you can talk to me and I can talk to you and tell you stories. And yep, Helium-3 is love's creation. I think that's what you're saying, right, Jane? At least Loaded. Whitley Strieber and Jay Farrell on the dark and on the Dark Journalist. Yep. Dark Journalist is really good. I just saw one that he really put the points together. Things have been going wrong in this country since we whacked Kennedy. And we whacked him because we believed the story. We went along with it because it was a lot easier than that than to get upset. And if Kennedy had stayed, not assassinated, instead of having a Bush, millennia, we would have had a Kennedy. Jack would have been a second time, then Bobby would have been twice, and then Junior would have also been president, and and a few other Kennedys would have been president. And Junior was murdered. He went down his little airplane. He was murdered. Because he was just another loose end. When he started George the magazine, that was like a kiss of his death, because he was realizing he was owned, and he was showing them that he could have his own little outlet that couldn't be controlled. And that was a metaphor of him. Hey, I'm not going along with this. I'm coming after you guys. And they took their time, and they killed him when they could, and made it look, oh, isn't that terrible? And we would have had a different world. The Cold War would have ended with Jack, and, we would have been in a world of abundance rather than a world of scarcity. And that's where we're kind of at it right now. That's why we're at this, window of opportunity, because, human race, even if it gets obliterated, it'll come back again as something else. Back in the day, we were reptiles, then we became, mice, and then we became monkeys, and then we became Cro-Magnon, and then too bad we didn't stay at Cro-Magnon. Cro-Magnons, they didn't hit their girlfriends over the head with clubs. Men breastfed their babies. They were the caregivers. They were, the women were the kick-ass ones. So Whitley's book about 2012 had to be quick. Book starts. It's they're counting down New Year's to 2012. And everyone's talking, oh, it's going to be the end of the times. And then the clock hits 12, fireworks go off, everyone, nothing goes wrong. Everyone goes, see, ha, 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 no big deal. Then, in 2035, which is coming up soon, the world cuts to this guy who's on a Learjet, and it's like falling apart. He says, why did I even get on this thing? And it's flying him back to this place in Virginia. And he lands, he gets off, and the jet takes off and blows up at takeoff, right? And he goes over to a place where they kind of go underground, and there's a group of people, and they're trying to figure out how, oh, there it is, 22222. How to, it looks like the end of the world is going to happen tomorrow, and what can you do? And then they realize that they were all these kids in 2012 who was at the same place. It was a private school, specially made for people who were gifted. And it was like a little bit of that TV show Fringe, right? And where, Harold had these kids in Florida, right? And gave them this drug that kind of enhanced their part that just needed a little push. And then they were special people who could be psychic and fly and, that kind of stuff. And so bottom line is the world is falling apart, and they're realizing they just have to come together as this group. And they were very, different type of people. In the first few hours, they were kind of arguing and smitting and, going after, you did this me when we were here. They kind of all realized that, oh, this is the private school we were in. And then they started getting on each other's backs for being jerks when they were little. And then they kind of realized, no, we were kind of special. And when we did things together, and then they started meditating. Why do you think I have you guys meditate? Because what they do is they kind of, there's this mural on this wall that's kind of tattered, but it's like, Shangri-La. And so they all meditate together, get themselves into this thing, and then they walk through the wall into Shangri-La. Just like the book and movie Men Who, meditated with goats. I mean, all this stuff is real. And that's why I'm doing this show, to give you, a hand through dreamy dreamland. Because I don't want to go through the magic picture all by myself. Yeah, there's other folk on the other side who'll be happy to see me. But I've been sent here to get you guys on the shtick, And yeah, if you want to come to the Deep Green this spring and, we're not all dying of the plague, well, that's fine. We can have fun, and we can, start the traveling video art circus. We just need some people who know how to do a good website, write a good curriculum, and then put it out to all the colleges within 100 miles of here for the fall semester, right? And 2 or 3 will say, yeah, that's a good idea. Sure. We'll come and do it. It'll be really, wow, that was great. And then we'll have more people, more colleges, and we just drive from one college to the next, put on a big party, get kids really excited about the alternative aesthetic of love's co-creation, and we save the world. We can do that, or we can, just stay at home and, eat cheeseburgers, or, no longer cheeseburgers. We're going to have these amazing burgers, made from recycled plastic bags. Anyway, so I'm going to go have lunch. I'll see you around 8 p.m. So call up people and tell them, let's have 100 people on the chat, or at least 30, I mean, it's nice. It's a nice 8 people. That was good. Maybe we had 9. Political polarization, and that is how the hidden hand wins, through political polarization. Anyway, I'm starting to get hungry, so I'm gonna sign off here. I love you guys. So 8 p.m., right? So wherever you are, come and visit.